Chris Bohjalian is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 25 books. His books have been selections of Oprah's Book Club and Best Books of the Year by numerous magazines and newspapers. 3 of his novels, Midwives, Secrets of Eden, and Past the Bleachers, have become movies, and The Flight Attendant became an Emmy Award-winning hit TV series. He has written for a wide variety of magazines and newspapers, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan. He lives in Vermont with his wife, photographer Victoria Bluer. Welcome to the First 50 Pages, Chris.
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're so excited to talk with you today about your latest book, The Jackal's Mistress. But first, I'd love to talk about this goal you have to never write the same book twice. Can you point to a moment when you were inspired to make this a goal, or did it always just feel like the plan for you as a writer?
Going all the way back to 8th grade, my reading has always been unbelievably eclectic. I moved around a lot as a kid. At one point, I went to 5 schools in 6 years in 3 states. So libraries were always my second home. And when I was in 8th grade, I was living in the Hialeah Miami Lakes Public Library. And the books that I read that year included The Exorcist, Jaws, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Expensive People by Joyce Carol Oates. And I still recall the first sentence of Expensive People. 5 words: I was a child murderer. So when I started writing novels, I began with a mystery, went to a ghost story, and then wrote a novel about a father coping what would have been his son's Little League team, had his son not died of leukemia. And those 3 books had nothing in common. And I didn't consciously set out to write 3 books that were wildly different, in wildly different subgenres of fiction. But it seemed really natural, given how eclectic my reading tastes always have been.
I love that story.
Yeah.
That's it.
Sorry, both were just listening, captivated by your story.
That is, I think, a great jumping off point for a memoir someday, too, right?
Yeah. Oh, I think a lot of the great Scott Fitzgerald quote that a novelist is always that kid who is not invited to the party and is looking through the glass window with his fingers pressed against the window pane. I completely butchered the quote, but you get the idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, you've written historical fiction, page-turning thrillers, literary fiction, and even ghost stories. Do you approach your writing knowing what kind of story that it's going to be?
First of all, I love the fact that you refer to my thrillers as page-turners because sometimes I think they are, but sometimes I think they are these character studies that happen to begin with a dead body. The Flight Attendant is a perfect case in point. I never, ever viewed The Flight Attendant as a page turner when I was writing it. I always viewed it as a character study of a functional alcoholic, the ultimate hot mess, a flight attendant who is such a scarred human being, who is so traumatized by her childhood that she can function at 35,000 feet on an airplane, but barely on the ground. And she happens to wake up next to a dead body in Dubai. And she is such a mess that it crosses her mind, could I have killed him? And we are off and running. And of course, that did become a wonderful TV series, and it is viewed as a thriller. But when I really deconstruct that book, it never felt to me, and especially when I was writing it, that it's a page turner.
And I think when you create great characters, there is that sense of urgency to keep reading to find out what's going to happen. So, yeah, I mean, if you're creating great characters like you do, then of course it propels the story forward so fantastically.
I love those 3 words you just used. I've never ever used them when I think about my work, but they're really spot on. Sense of urgency. I've always used the word dread that, dread is the secret sauce that makes my books work when they work, because heaven knows they do not always work. But when they work, it's dread. But I think I like your creation more.
I struggle
Sense of
with
urgency.
dread. Yeah, I struggle with dread in reading books, but I'm good with sense of urgency.
It's just a good reframe.
Well, also, you've got dibs on that title. If you ever write a novel, I don't care what it's about, call it sense of urgency.
I'll put that in my notes for this interview right now so I don't forget.
Do it. It's yours. You've got dibs.
Oh.
So The Jackal's Mistress is your latest book, which will be available for readers on March 11th, and it is a return to historical fiction. The book trailer, and can I just say how much I love a good book trailer, says it is inspired by a dangerous true story of forbidden friendship. For listeners who haven't been following you on social media, can you tell us a little bit about this story?
The Jackal's Mistress is a Civil War Romeo and Juliet, a Civil War love story, and, well, it is a Civil War story with a sense of urgency. It's actually based on a true story I wrote about in 2003 for Reader's Digest. Here's the Reader's Digest condensed version of what really happened. A lieutenant in the Vermont Brigade has his leg amputated and most of one of his hands blown off in a fight in the northern Shenandoah Valley in September 1864. When the Union Army goes deeper into the valley, he is left behind to experience what Drew Gilpin Faust wrote about in This Republic of Suffering, the Good Death. He's not going to make it back to a regimental hospital. He cannot go with the army. So he's left behind to pass peacefully. But he doesn't die. He is found by a formerly enslaved woman who is working with another woman at a grist mill. The other woman is the wife of a Confederate soldier who is lost somewhere in the prison, the Union POW system. This woman, Betty Van Meter, makes a decision, thinking about karma. Maybe if I can save this blue belly's life, this Yankee abolitionist, my husband will come home safely to me. And she and these two formerly enslaved people who work in the grist mill with her keep him hidden from Jubal Early's army, keep him hidden from Mosby's guerrilla raiders, and keep him alive. And I love the notion in 2023 and 2024 when I was writing this book of a love story between two people who are from worlds so dramatically different. Can these two people find sufficient commonality not to kill each other? And I was off and running. Now, The Jackal's Mistress is not their story. Their story was merely the inspiration for a much longer, deeper exploration of that moment in time in the Civil War.
I mean, it really does sound like a fascinating true story, but you really do bring it to life in this book, The Jackal's Mistress. And one of the things that you don't shy away from in really any of your novels is the violence of time and place that you are writing. And in this book, you don't draw the curtain on the brutality of the Civil War. As readers, we are confronted with death and dying and brutality, but of course we get to experience the humanity of the characters through the story too. We get both, And while I think you have achieved your goal so far of not writing the same book twice, this is something that's kind of characteristic of your writing. Why is that important for you as a storyteller?
Life is so messy, and we as human beings are so violent and can be so horrific, either because of childhood demons or whatever, the situations that we are in. When I wrote a book years ago called Midwives, about a midwife on trial for manslaughter after a bedroom C-section goes horribly wrong and the mother dies. Not that a bedroom C-section can, really ever go right, I have a feeling. But so many readers said to me, why did you put the C-section in the book? Couldn't you just go ... and say, oh, the mother died? And my immediate reaction has always been no, because that is the center of the novel. That's what happened in this fictional world. Now, the Jackal's Mistress is set in a moment in time in 1864 when parts of the Shenandoah Valley were a bloodbath. General Sheridan was working his way deeper through it, the goal being to absolutely destroy this breadbasket for the Confederacy. The Confederacy knows it is reeling and is on its last legs. And so a lot of Confederates are fighting like absolutely cornered wolves. And it's a war of attrition. And it's a war of attrition that the South is never going to win. So it was a really violent corridor, the Shenandoah Valley, that is. It was a really violent part of American history. I mean, 620,000 soldiers died in the Civil War on both sides, more than virtually every war after the Civil War up to the Vietnam War. I mean, that's World War I, that's World War II, that's the Korean War, that's the Spanish-American War. That's a lot of wars.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine writing a book about the Shenandoah Valley in 1864 and having it Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that there is anything wrong with Anne of Green Gables.
So you're noted as being very committed to the research for your novels. What did that look like for you for this story?
I think it was John Gardner in The Art of Fiction who said there are two ways to wake a reader from the fictional dream: clumsiness, or bad writing, or inauthenticity, or bad research. The homework matters. So this particular book had three kinds of research. The secondary research, which means reading all of the memoirs, all of the histories of the Shenandoah Valley. The primary research, the letters from the soldiers, everything I could find out about Betty Van Meter, the rebel woman who saved the life of Henry Bedell, the Yankee Vermonter abolitionist. And then there was the in-person research. My wife and I spent a while traveling from Frederick, Maryland, where we went to the Museum of Civil War Medicine. I am an expert now on bone saws. To Harper's Ferry, where much of this novel is set. Then southwest through the Shenandoah Valley. We spent a lot of time in Berryville and the Third Battle of Winchester, that battleground, and finally going to Richmond. And in all of those places, I interviewed people. Most of them don't know anything about Henry Bedell and Betty Van Meter because it really is this obscure footnote to the Civil War. When 620,000 people die, the fact that one lieutenant manages to live isn't news unless it's the way he managed to survive.
Yeah. One of the moments in the book that stayed with me, and maybe because I see it reflected in this current moment in history that we're living in. But Libby and Jacob are traveling, and they're come upon by a couple of men that, in Libby's evaluation, if I can quote the book, were either just born bad or raised in such a way that they festered until their souls grew putrid. She'd seen her share. The war had allowed them to be themselves, execrable and unrepentant, in ways they couldn't before Sumter. And that stayed with me for a while. That whole scene. You want to talk about a sense of urgency and everything. That whole scene is just really powerful. But just that line that,
Yep.
people now had permission to behave in ways that they didn't before. Yeah, it stayed with me. I don't really have a question about it.
Well, I mean, the Civil War dramatically altered behavior on a macro level and a micro level. On a macro level, the United States was completely unprepared for this level of carnage. And by 1864, this level of macro brutality. The whole idea that from May through June of 1864, Grant was going to fight his way through Virginia no matter how much blood was shed, or that Sherman was going to cut a swath across the southern part of the Confederacy all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, uncaring about civilian carnage, civilian starvation, to prove to the Confederacy that you can't even protect your civilians. You cannot even protect your farms. This treason has gone too far. The U.S. was unprepared for that level of violence. Moreover, it wasn't prepared for the sort of micro-violence that would occur when people like John Mosby, a guerrilla leader for the Confederacy, would hang Union officers in 1864. Just would hang them as captured POWs, so to speak. And this was all new for the United States. This was a level of barbarism that was arguably new to the world.
So, not your first novel, but certainly the one that catapulted you into the spotlight was Midwives. This was a selection for Oprah's book club in the late 90s. What was it like when literally everyone was reading and talking about your book?
Oh, spectacular. I say that not merely as a narcissist or a novelist, but it was great fun. Oprah Winfrey is a remarkable and a wonderful reader and human being. And I will tell you, she picks Midwives for her book club. The book had come out in March of 1997. It was my first bestseller, even before Oprah picks it. So now Oprah picks it when it's a paperback, and it instantly goes to #1 at this new thing called Amazon. It instantly goes to #1 on the New York Times Book Review. And when she holds the book up on her show and says, for our next book, we're going to Vermont, it's, in the publishing community, it's news. So an AP reporter interviews me that day, and this reporter really wants to talk about how rich I'm about to become. And I keep wanting to dial it back to the text. The reporter finally realizes I'm not going to go there and says, okay, well, tell us about where you were when Oprah called. And I told her that, I had been with 2 guys from the furnace company in the basement of my 1898 village house in Vermont, seeing if we could milk 1 more year out of the furnace, which we had literally been in that house since the Eisenhower administration. Yep, the paperwork was from 1959. And so I tell the reporter this story, and the reporter says, well, I'll bet you can afford a new furnace now, right? And I said, well, yes, but I could have afforded a new furnace a week ago. I promised. I mean, because, the fact is, by 1998, I'd already had 1 movie made. I had another movie in development. My career was completely fine.
Yeah.
But okay, So my father in Florida calls me up the next day, and my father's the only person in the world who used to call me Chrissy. He says, Chrissy, be honest. Do you need money? And I said, Dad, why in the world would you think I need money? He said, tell me the truth, Chrissy. It's okay. If this writing thing isn't working out, do you need money? And I said, why would you think that? And so I'm looking at the Miami Herald, and there you are on the front page of the living section. Vermont novelist can finally afford new furnace is the headline.
We've really enjoyed our conversation with you today, and I have to say that we agree with the Boston Globe. You're truly one of our finest storytellers. So thank you for joining us here on the First 50 Pages today.